There's this poem by a guy named Mark Smith called "When You Get to the Top of the Mountain, Pull the Next Man Up, the Next Woman Up, the Next Child Up." I think that's a good way to have a coda for a career I've been very grateful for.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been a leading innovator and manufacturer of printmaking products for over 50 years. Speedball's speed screens answer the call to have an easy-to-use way to screen print no matter your experience level. Whether printing at home, studio, or classroom, these ready-to-use mesh sheets allow you to create permanent photographic stencils without the need to mix emulsion or coat a screen. All you need is your design and you're ready to print. Pick up the Speed Screens kit for the most affordable way to get all the materials necessary for your next print masterpiece. There's a link in the show notes. My guest this week is Tony Fitzpatrick, artist, printmaker, podcaster, actor, boxer, tattooist, and renowned ornithophile. We talk about his growing up on the south side of Chicago and his early trouble staying in school, taking on a music festival in defense of one of the last mating pairs of piping plover in the world, making cover art for the Neville Brothers, and quite possibly, no, definitely, the best story I've ever heard about being discovered. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to go to the birds with Tony Fitzpatrick. Hi, Tony. How's it going?
Hey, Miranda. How are you?
I don't know if you remember this, but you gave me one of the nicest compliments I've ever received, and it is one I have held close to my heart in times of trouble, which is that you said when I was leaving Davidson, you said that you hope I stay in this business because I elevate the field.
Absolutely.
And it was just like whenever I was feeling down or trying to get the podcast off the ground or working some stupid job because I couldn't get an art job, I would think about you saying that. And it just, once you know, it meant a lot to me.
No, seriously, honestly, you dignified the business, and that's not a small thing. I love working with Sam Davidson. He's always been nothing but honest and a gentleman and a really good guy. I still work with him.
Yeah.
And I work with his neighbor 2 doors down, Frederick Holmes, who's the same kind of man. Those guys are something of an endangered species in the art world, but
yeah, truly,
they absolutely dignified the field. So. And, you served Davidson well, and you served me well. I mean, you put some cash in my pocket, kid,
That's why we do what we do, yeah.
I got for lunch the next day. So.
That's great. Well, I'm so happy to get a chance to sit down and have a focused chat with you for the next hour or so. And
well, good.
I know a lot of people know you and know parts of your story, and I'm hoping we can talk about it more and talk about the exciting things that are still going on for you. So I always invite my guests on the podcast to just introduce themselves. And I say, answer the questions that are just the like, who you are, where you are, what you do kind of questions.
I'm Tony Fitzpatrick. I'm in my hometown. I'm in Chicago. I'm technically in East Humboldt Park. I own 2 galleries here, one called The Dime, and the other is called TF Projects. I've been showing people I thought were underappreciated for the last 30 years. And we take no percentage of sales. And I'm very lucky in that I have a couple of spaces that I'm able to trade my own artwork for a large percentage of the rent. And I've had my final museum show because I think it's time for people who look like me to create some institutional wall space for people who don't look like me, for, artists of color, brown artists, Asian artists, LGBTQ artists. By art world standards, I've kind of gotten mine. I'm in every museum that counts, and I think it's time to just gently and humbly bow out and shine a light on the talent that I see all around me that still continues to inspire me. To which end I embarked on curating, which I'd never done before. I figured, well, if the thing shits the bed, I can always say, well, I never done it before.
Right. Yeah.
Why are you listening to me? We opened the show a couple of weeks ago in New York City and Chelsea at Satchel Projects called BOP, Adventures in Contemporary Collage. And what I wanted to do was pay back all of the artists whose work I've learned so much from. Some of them I barely knew. Some of them I knew really well. And it kind of planted this seed in my head that this is a show that could grow and it could continue on to other cities. And it will finally end up at the Metropolitan Museum of Art about 3 years from now.
That's
with
so
a great
exciting.
big doorstop catalog. And it's a way of thanking the artists who've taught me so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about your last museum exhibition a little bit, the Jesus of Western Avenue,
Yeah.
and the collage exhibition as well. But before we kind of get to the now, if we look a little bit in the past, I know you said you grew up in Chicago. It's your hometown.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what role art played in that part of your life growing up there?
It honestly, it saved me. I had a very difficult time with school. I got expelled a great deal of times. And the one place I could go to where nobody could fool with me were my sketchbooks. When people ask me, what are you now? What is it that you do? I always tell them I'm a failed cartoonist. I grew up loving Dick Tracy and Mad Magazine and comics, and they were kind of a vital part of the lingua franca that surrounded me that I didn't really even recognize as art until I was 17 or 18,
Mm-hmm.
And there was always this thing in our culture about high art and low art. And I thought I've come to think that was unfortunate because it's all art. Robert Crumb and Chester Gould are, swimming in the same side of the pool. One guy's a right-wing reactionary nut, Mr. Gould, who I met when I was a kid, when I was a little boy.
Oh my gosh.
And Robert Crumb has kind of kicked open the door for comics and showed us what was possible. We could make images and narratives about the transgressive without and hold our head up at the same time we were making art. So those guys were both kind of vitally important. Plus all the guys from Mad Magazine. Sam Jaffe, Sergio Aragonés, Don Martin. All of the great geniuses from Mad Magazine. I found that magazine when I was 11 years old, and I started reading it, and I thought, fuck, man, they're getting away with it. It's like, these guys are professional wise asses, and they get paid for it.
Yeah.
And that became kind of my hammer and nails against the world, So the comics and, on every once in a while on a Tuesday, my mother would bring me down to the Art Institute of Chicago for free day. You could go for nothing on Tuesday. And I remember the first time I stood in front of The Inventions of Monsters by Salvador Dali, and then Nighthawks by Edward Hopper. And the same thing happened both times. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. It's like I didn't know what exactly those things meant. I just knew they had something to do with me.
Yeah.
And, my mother, I'm one of 8 children, and my mother indulged me more than the rest of the kids. She, would take me to the art supply store when I was 22 years old and on the balls of my ass, barely could hold a job. And she would buy me my art supplies,
Yeah.
And 5 years later, I had my first one-man show in New York, and it hit. I got a big review, and the show sold out. And all of a sudden, I went from being a $110 a week bartender plus tips to contemporary artist. And it was a little bit of a culture shock. I'd gone to New York. And I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to enter that world. I went to Washington Square. I used to make these drawings on slate boards because I thought right before I got really serious about making art, I had a substantial drug problem, and after I got clean, I thought, every time I sit down and draw, at least let me learn something. And the blackboards implied, the learning process for me, and they hit a nerve. The only reason I got a show is I was sitting in Washington Square. I had followed this girl to New York, and the day I got there, she Dear Johns my ass. It's like, I wasn't exactly heartbroken. I liked her a lot, but I was in New York, and I just tried to figure out, well, how can my ticket isn't home for like 5 days, so how can I make the most of this and make my $200 last?
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Washington Square. This guy I knew, Bobby Letterman, was headed there. He used to put his paintings out there. He was one of those spray paint guys. So he goes, "Hey, go down to the square." He goes, "You won't get top dollar." He goes, "But you get some money. So I put 3 or 4 of my slates out, and about an hour later, I was working on another one, and this guy bops up. He's got a crew cut and kind of the cool glasses, and I can tell he's like hip. I look like a rube. I look like a biker. And he's looking at the slate drawings, and he goes, "What are you getting for those?" And Miranda, till that time, I never really even thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to swing for the fence. I go, $50. And he goes, "Okay, I want those 3." And I'm wrapping them up for him with this new invention in the mid-'80s called bubble wrap.
Uh-huh.
And he says to me, he goes, "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, you coming back?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm bringing a friend of mine." So I've got $150 more. It's like I'm going to be able to eat someplace that has silverware that night. And I felt really good about it. I was back the next day, and I set up a few more of my slate drawings. I had like 12 with me. And sure enough, man, this guy comes back, and he comes bopping up with the coolest guy I've ever seen in my life. He's a black guy. He's got short braids. He's smoking a joint. He's pops all over Washington Square. It's like he's smoking a joint like you can't see me.
Yeah.
And he goes, "What are you getting for those?" And I'm like, $50. And he goes, "I want those 2. So I wrap them up, and they're standing a few feet away, kind of talking and stuff. And as I hand them to them, they go, "There's an easier way to do this." And I'm like, do tell. And
Yeah.
they said, "You got a half an hour?" And I'm like, "I got nothing but time, man." It's like, and they walked me down 7th Street to Avenue B. Now, it's only about a 10-minute walk, but every 5 feet, people are walking up, hugging these guys, kiss, kiss. And it dawned on me, it's like, I don't know who the fuck these guys are, but they're somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So we walk into this gallery that I had walked into 2 days before. The woman never even looked up from her Vanity Fair. She was like, "We look at slides on Monday. You can pick them up on Tuesday." But when she sees who I'm with at the door, she practically kills herself getting out from behind the desk, right? And she walks up, kiss, 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 kiss. "We have to get lunch, la, 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 la," right?
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the one guy goes, "You got to see this guy's drawings. We just bought a bunch." And I laid them all out on her desk, and she goes, "These are exquisite. Thank you." She looks at me really carefully. She goes, "Have we met?" I said, "No, I get that a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and she gave me a show for 6 months later.
Wow.
The 2 guys were Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring.
Holy shit. Oh my God.
And you know what?
Tony.
I never was able to repay those kindnesses. So
Yeah.
that went very far in me deciding to open galleries that showed artists who should be better known.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a show 6 months later. It sold out. I got a big review, and all of a sudden, I did nothing else but this for the last 35 years.
And so at that point, were you then kind of move residence to New York? Because I know at some point, Big Cat Press comes into this, right?
Yeah, my partner Dan Ferrara opened a Big Cat Press gallery on the Lower East Side on Orchard Street. And, I mean, we would have hung in there if not for, 9/11, I mean.
Really?
Yeah, it just, all of a sudden, that part of town turned into a ghost town for a better part of a year and a half. He moved it again to, over on First Avenue. And, we just could not make the breakwater, and not for want of trying. I mean, Dan was smart, organized, and moreover than that, a careful, judicious guy about business. He knew his way around it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that point in American history, this is 2000, then 2001. 2001, like the pandemic, just kind of shot a hole in the bottom of everyone's boat. It's like 2001, I didn't even concentrate on selling my work after 9/11. I did benefits. I did etchings on behalf of the Lower East Side Arts Council. I was busy kind of raising money for other people, and wound up taking a few artists in residencies, one in Missoula, Montana, which gave me one of the best bodies of etchings I ever made, the autumn etching. One night I came home after dinner, and the lady at the desk says, there's going to be a meteor shower tomorrow at 4:10 in the morning. Would you like a wake-up call? And I said, yeah, absolutely.
Aww.
And out there are no, there's not the proliferation of street lights or any of that. I went out, I had a blanket wrapped around me. I lit up a cigarette and had a cup of coffee, and I watched a meteor shower, but without all of the distraction of the lights you have in the city. And it was like watching the sky have this celestial pinball machine. It was astonishing. And it was one of the things that kind of brought me back to nature as a subject. It brought me back to one of the things I did in Missoula is saw a lot of birds,
Yeah. I know birds are a theme for you, and you constantly been present in meaningful ways. And, I'm someone who's just absolutely animal obsessed, and I completely identify with that. I feel like my higher power was getting to see wolves in the wild at Yellowstone once. It was like, I was like, that's it. I'm looking at God.
And I kind of hold with that. I'm an atheist, I believe what Crazy Horse believed. I believed in the great mystery, and that if there's something up there guiding the whole thing, I'm not meant to understand it, and I'll figure it out when I get there. I don't ever hold people's faith against them. People of faith, it's like, have at it. If it does for you what it's supposed to do, which makes you more compassionate, more decent, more grateful for being alive, I'm all for you. I don't share what you believe. That's it.
Yeah.
But the birds are real important. I mean, they have been since I was a little tiny kid. My grandmother came to stay with us after my father had had a heart attack, and every morning she would toast a couple pieces of bread, spread jam on them, chop them all up, and throw them out the back door for the birds. And I'm one of 8 children. We never wasted food, So I said to my grandmother, why are you giving all our bread to the birds? I'm like 5 years old and a little shit, And she goes like this to me. She goes, give your ears a chance. She opens the window and I heard it, sparrows, blackbirds, mourning doves, finches, bluebirds, this operatic cacophony of sounds. She goes, for a piece of bread, you can hear God sing.
Oh, I just got goosebumps. That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful.
That one pretty much destroys me every time I think of it.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So, whenever I needed to get out of the shit house with my mother, I'd draw her a cardinal. When I get bounced from the school, and she would stick up for me with my father. She would say, They were after him. They pestered him. They wanted to take his sketchbook away, and he told them to fuck off. So I'd be in trouble. The old man would be pissed, but I would make my mother a cardinal, and I wasn't grounded anymore. I figured out that keeping me in school was just a way of keeping me off the street, And when I got kicked out of school, I would go to work with my father. My father was in the funeral business, sold burial vaults. So he called on funeral homes. Now, if you went to work with my father, at lunchtime you got to eat in a restaurant, which was a treat. My mother could explain any line of Irish poetry to you. Any great writer. My mother wrote beautiful poetry before her and my father got married. But like most Irish women, she was not a cook, So lunch was like a big deal, And my dad would take me to a joint called Clarksville, which was damn near a gourmet hot dog place before there were gourmet hot dog places. Phil Schmidt's in Indiana, and we get lake perch, fried lake perch. It was, and he'd be pissed at me the first day, kicked out of another goddamn school. The first half a day, and then the second half, his need as a storyteller would assert itself, and pretty soon, 4 or 5 days later, we were having the time of our life. They had a hard time getting me into other schools because word had traveled.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one school, the school I finally graduated from, half of seventh and eighth grade. We're walking up to the school, and the nun is standing out there. She's about 4'11", and she's like nodding her head as we're walking up. And it's like, I wanted to say to my father, she looks pissed off. What's going on, And she goes like this. When I got there, she goes, I know all about you. I've heard all the stories, buddy. Let me tell you something, Buster. We're not going to expel you. We're not kicking this can down the road. We're going to fix your wagon. And I almost said, oh, yeah, bitch. And my father beat the shit out of me, so I didn't. So he's gripping my shoulder, and he goes, Sister, Anthony has agreed to pursue his studies with renewed vigor. When he said that, I almost started laughing. I had to bite into my cheeks to keep from laughing. And she goes, I hope so. And she goes, I'm keeping an eye on you, And sure enough, man, she followed me around all the time. And my third day there, this douchebag walked up and shoved me, and he goes, yeah, we hear you think you're real rough and la la la. Yeah, maybe meet me by the basketball court after school if you got the stones. It's like, I'll be there, At first I said, well, why wait? We'll just do it here, So I went out and I kicked the shit out of Jack, who later became a friend, so I'm not going to say his last name. And then his friend Mike got into it, an Irish kid, and I pounded his ass too. And then this big kid, Mike Clegis, got into it and pounded my ass. And 2 days later, we were like all the best of friends, One day I'm sitting in the lunchroom and I'm drawing a blue jay, and I'm having a really good day. It really looks beautiful. And the nun, Sister Regina, walks behind me and she goes, looks like you have a little bit of talent for something else besides raising hell. And I said, yeah. She goes, yeah, blue jays are my favorite bird. They're pugnacious like I am. So I waited till the next day. I waited till she was out of her office. I carefully took it out of my tablet and I just put it on her desk. So later that day at lunch, she's walking behind me. She goes, thank you. She goes, that's a lovely picture. I'm going to get it framed. And I said, well, I know a frame shop. I can get you a deal. She goes, maybe they'll donate it. I said, Sister, things aren't that good, But the guy did donate it. The guy was a friend of my father's. He had a friend shop in town. And that woman never gave me any shit after that. In fact, she was really supportive of me. In fact, about a week afterwards, she walks up to me and she goes, Yeah, I heard you handed Jack Casner and Mike Duffy their ass after school last week. I said, sister, they started it. She goes, yeah, I heard that. I heard that. Or else you'd be doing detention. I said, I understand. I'm not. She goes, try to avoid kicking the shit out of all your classmates. And it turns out she was from the same part of the world I was. She's from the south side of Chicago. And she knew some of my mom's friends, which helped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew them. I used to run around with them. We all worked at Finnegan's drugstore. So I kind of, I was kind of able to, in a stealth way, get away with murder. Cover my tracks a little more. When I talk about people of faith, I would never want to disparage what Sister Regina believed. It's not what I believe, but I'm not one of these professional atheists who goes around trashing people for their faith. I think it's ungenerous. I think it's unkind, and it's ungracious
and unhelpful.
No, not at all.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything.
It does not bolster my argument any. I'm past my final museum show, and it was 94 pieces. It was 3 years ago when we first started talking about it. It was supposed to be a much more humble affair. It was supposed to be 40, 45 pieces. I mean, even that is a big show. Then COVID and the pandemic hit, and I'm sitting out in Humboldt Park, and I realized I no longer have an income. They closed my galleries, they closed my studio, and we decided to form a jigsaw puzzle company. My wife and my friend Kevin were on me for years about it. Like, look, these would make really difficult jigsaw puzzles, and thankfully, they are.
Yeah, I have to say one of the highlights for the pandemic for me that I looked forward to was seeing photos of you on Facebook with a mask on and your puzzle on the pizza, the Big Bun pizza thing, handing your puzzle to someone who had gotten one. It was just such a highlight when like everything was shitty news. Like to see Tony delivering a puzzle, I loved it.
You got to find a way to find the joy. Sometimes you must seek it out. I enjoyed it immensely. Now, take my word for it that I have never finished a jigsaw puzzle in my life. My brain just isn't wired that way. But we found ancillary good things to use them for. We found out that people who are experiencing onset dementia, that jigsaw puzzles give them an attainable task.
I could see that.
They can conquer, and it fires up the cognitive recognition pulses or impulses. So we were able to do some good. I also found out the kids who were terminally ill at Lurie's Children's Hospital in Chicago loved them. So I went and dropped off 30 of them. And, if you can take a very ill child's mind off their illness for even an hour or two, I think there's some grace in that. So.
Yeah. And the birds are featured in the puzzles, yeah?
Yeah. I've gone way down the rabbit hole with the bird nerd shit. Later on tonight, I'll be on a Zoom call with all my bird nerd friends. And believe me, my wife, her eyes roll back in her head and say, oh, shit, here we go.
Wait, is this like the Chicago Audubon Society? Who's the bird nerds?
This is the Chicago Ornithological Society.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's become, I've become an activist on behalf of habitat and particularly avian species for birds. We're trying to enact laws that buildings should put window treatments that don't promote collisions for migrating birds.
Yeah. When I was in Australia, there was so much talk about the incredible birds that are down there.
Yeah.
And how domesticated cats, which of course aren't native to Australia, are just devastating those populations of cockatoos and parakeets and galahs.
I'm not a fan of cats. I'm really not.
Aside from Big Cat Press,
Big Cat Press was named for a boxer named Cleveland Big Cat Williams.
Gotcha.
There's an argument to be made that all cats should be house cats. If you let them roam and stuff, they get into. They don't just kill birds; they kill all kinds of other animals. Baby rabbits.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy about them.
Something that I was thinking about with your work and kind of talking about the pandemic is like the sanctity of nature in urban spaces. I think about that a lot with your work as someone I associate so much with Chicago, but also with the animals that come visit us in our urban
Yeah.
spaces, and how, it must have saved people to be in lockdown, but just to like have a walk in the park.
I live 4 blocks east of Humboldt Park, and I would walk out there every morning and just maintain my sanity. I would sit. There were these big rocks right by the lagoon. I'd sit on them, and I would hear the wind blow through the trees, the music of morning songbirds, the ducks and the geese, the sound of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to center myself because I'm in therapy for depression, and during the pandemic, it kind of became more pronounced. And
Mm-hmm.
what I wanted to do was just head off anything really dark, So I bought a bunch of feeders from my backyard, a big bird bong, and I get every kind of bird in my backyard. I spend $400 a month on bird seed. I have to go all the way out to Naperville, which is like 40 miles west of Chicago. And we have to load 50-pound sacks of
Oh my God.
wild bird feed, cracked corn, safflower, millet, and then these little millet cakes for the woodpeckers, And then during migration, when the orioles and the tanagers come through, you take an orange and you nail it to the back porch, spread a bunch of jelly on. Welch's grape jelly is what they like, and the orioles show up. The fruit birds. So yeah, I've gone way down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tony's bird sanctuary, it sounds like.
kind of.
Yeah.
And everyone in my neighborhood has feeders. It's like once in a while we take turns looking at each other's feeders. It's lovely.
Yeah, that's so important. And we're so lucky that we haven't destroyed it all yet. I think about
I'm
that.
trying real hard not to let them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I became activist 3 years ago. They wanted to put a music festival on Montrose Point, where there are only 65 mating pairs of piping plovers left in the world. And there was a pair mating there, Monty and Rose. And this guy wanted to put an EDM music festival there. And I said, well, we're not going to let you do that. It's a bird sanctuary. Well, the alderman says, So I called the alderman. I used to write for a newspaper. And I said, Mr. Kappelman, I said, I'm going to press with this before 5 o'clock. Why will you not enforce the protections inherent in the word sanctuary?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, that's not really what we're doing. I said, bullshit. I said, it's exactly what you're doing. How much did they give you? And he hung up. And then I called the promoter back. Keep in mind, the promoter was like one of my bigger collectors at the time. I said, look, Jerry, you either find a new location or I'm coming after you publicly on social media, in my column. Well, we're moving, 300 meters north of where. I said, that's not enough. I said, look, I'm not worried about the sound. You think it's a sound thing. I'm worried about the human traffic.
Yeah.
And these plovers, they nest on the ground.
Oh,
and
okay.
Your drunken, ecstasy-taking douchebags are going to be stomping all over that beach. I said, now look, you either back off. There are 27 miles of beachfront in Chicago. Find another beach. And he dug his heels in. So I did two things. On social media every day, I held up a sign saying, Jerry, do the right thing. Move Bambi on the beach. And I did this constantly. And then I talked to two biker clubs, and I said, guys, if he doesn't back off, I would really like it if we made a human chain surrounding the nesting area. And both clubs, the Booze Fighters and Half Fast, agreed.
Oh
And
my
they're like, hey,
gosh.
Tony, he goes, any of the emo crowd comes near, we'll stomp them into the fucking ground. You don't have to do that much. I said, but make sure they know it's definitely a possibility, you know? So
That's such an amazing
then
image,
a
this
tribe
chain
called,
of bikers protecting these
yeah,
birds. It's so beautiful.
well, I've done patches for both of those clubs, you know?
Yeah.
And so then a Tribe Called Quest is a headliner, and my friend knows their tour manager. He's a birder. He's one of the most well-known black birders in America. And he tells them the story, you know, and he sits the guys from Tribe down and he says, hey, you know, we may carry firearms, we may deal some herb, we may, you know, but we have no truck with extinction. It's like, dog, we don't pull out of this, we're buying ourselves $5 million worth of bad publicity. And they pulled out. And that sunk the whole thing. And Mamby withdrew, and the promoter, who hates me to this day, I thanked him publicly on social media. I said, Jerry, thank you. The environment thanks you, and a pair of mating piping plovers thanks you. You did the right thing. It isn't all about money. And he kept telling this guy who worked for him, who I gave a show to, a marvelous photographer named John Suss. You know, what Tony did to me was actionable. And John finally said, hey, you know what, Jerry? You're full of shit. If it was actionable, you'd have had him in court.
Yeah.
And secondly, Jerry, you were wrong. You were pure D fucking wrong, you know? So then John has a show like 4 months later in my gallery. Jerry shows up. He walks over, he shakes hand, and I said, I'm grateful that you're here for John. He goes, yeah, I am too. I'm here for John. I said, I understand.
Yeah.
And we never spoke again. So
yeah. Well, it's funny because I know that, I mean, you love music. You've done album covers. You talk about the way your work, you compare it to jazz. You know, I mean, it wasn't about that you're not for people listening and having access to music. I associate you very much with that side of the
I
world as
love music.
well.
Had
Yeah.
he moved that to another beach, I'd have gone to that festival. You know, I mean, I've done 20 album covers for Steve Earle. I did one for the Neville Brothers, one for Lou Reed. I've done a ton of jazz covers. Most notably for Frank Catalano, who I think is probably the greatest saxophone player on the planet right now, the greatest living. And I always do them for nothing just because, you know, they don't pay jazz guys anything.
Yeah.
And every time I ask him to play an event for me or something, he can't wait to do it, you know. I don't have any musical talent, so the only way guys like me who look like this get to be in the music business is you got to be able to do something, you know. So I do album covers, and I've enjoyed it. It's been, you know, with Steve Earle, I've been able to witness the making of an astonishing American songbook. He is every bit as important to my generation as Woody Guthrie's was to my father and my grandfather. So, yeah, I'm pretty blessed. I've been very fortunate.
How does the process work when making an album cover? Do you get to listen to the album first and get inspired?
Back when there still was a recording industry. You know?
Right.
The first one I did was for the soundtrack of a film called Something Wild. It was made by my friend Jonathan Demme, who was one of my biggest collectors. And then about a year and a half later, I got a phone call from an A&M executive named Jeff Gold. And he said, Aaron Neville was in my office and he saw your book. Would you like to make an album cover for the Neville Brothers? I said, yeah, I would. He said, well, this weekend you're flying to New Orleans.
Oh my gosh.
To meet with the brothers. And we think the name of the record is Yellow Moon. So I went down and I met with Aaron and Cyril and Arthur and Charlie. And I became quite close with Charlie for a long time, this saxophone player. And, they took me around their New Orleans. They took me around their history. They gave me a book called Up from the Cradle, which describes how all of the musics that preceded them became present and alive in their music. And I got it. I always wondered why the Nevilles were never a huge hit on radio. And it's like, I know why. I worked in radio for 10 years. Nobody knew where to put them. The black stations didn't know where to put them. They thought, well, this is more like jazz or blues. The white album-oriented recordings didn't know what to do with them. Because it's like this belongs on the black stations. Luckily, we had a station here in Chicago called WXRT, bless them, and they were big fans of the Nevilles, and they played the hell out of Yellow Moon. And the cover won a Diamond Award for album covers, which they don't give you any money; they just send you this fucking plaque, But it was like a feather in my cap, and I've started doing other album covers. I've done a lot of them for bands who nobody's ever heard of. I mean, the one I'm happiest about now, I just did it for an American singer-songwriter named Joe Pug. His real name is Puglisi. He's from Maryland. And he wrote a record. The title track was called The Nation of Heat. And I love the song so much, I asked him if I could title one of my Steppenwolf shows, Nickel History of the Nation of Heat. And he performed that live for that show, just to be a good guy, and he became my dear friend. And they re-recorded the record because when he first recorded it was just him and a guitar.
Yeah.
This time the band breathed new life into those songs. And it just came out again. If you get a chance, get it,
Yeah.
If you don't like it, I'll reimburse you, I mean, it's so good. So, I mean, I'm able to, support the musicians that I'm really fond of,
Yeah.
And who knows why anyone hits it anymore. It's like there's no recording industry. A good deal of it is dependent on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, kind of who has the biggest blast horn, who has the most consensus. So by doing the covers, I try to create an element of consensus for the artists that I admire.
Yeah. I want to make sure we get a chance to talk about this collage exhibition and maybe a little bit more in detail about it. I know you've been working on it for a few years, but what was the impetus to get it started? What made you think, all right, it's time to start gathering these collage artists?
I did my final museum show, and it was, my work's always been a combination of drawing and collage. And what I learned from looking at the collages that I most admire, and I got a great deal of them into the show, Owen Spryzek, Danny Torres, Paloma Treca, Clarice Castellino, Joshua Grotto, Mandy Cano Villalobos, Lisa Barcy, Swoon, Lou Beach, Paul Lockney, Ray Borchers, Mary O'Brien Spurrier, Carter Spurrier, and Charles Spurrier. They're kind of my go-tos because they evince a kind of fearlessness. And the one thing I was interested in is emphasizing the idea that, when you start making this kind of art, when you start adding assemblage and collage to your work, all of a sudden there's a spirit of improvisation. There's some bop, and you keep inventing. It's like juggling with one ball. You got to keep finding a way to entertain yourself. And that's kind of what I loved about this whole thing. And I chose the artists that I thought most deftly embodied that ethos. And I'm choosing another 15. The next iteration will have at least 30 artists. Then the one after that will have 45. And when we land at the Met, it'll be 60 contemporary collages. I could not be more proud of all of them and not be more indebted to all of them. I've learned a great deal from looking at their work. And I look at this as a final chapter in my career, and that I can shine a light on other people.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten mine. I've been treated well. I'm not rich. I probably never will be, but I've been, materially rewarded for my work and my career, and it's time to spread some of that around.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful, and something that I wish more people would think about. I think there's so much of an attitude of it's never enough and it's just me. I mean,
Yeah,
that's like the American way, right? Like,
you notice more of that with Trumpism, and I want to fly in the face of that. I mean, hey, look, were it up to me, Bernie Sanders would be president. I'm a democratic socialist. It's like, but for a socialist, I make an embarrassing amount of money for my work. But I do like the idea of there's this poem by a guy named Mark Smith called "When You Get to the Top of the Mountain, Pull the Next Man Up, the Next Woman Up, the Next Child Up." I think that's a good way to have a coda for a career I've been very grateful for.
Yeah. And your final exhibition, the Jesus of Western Avenue,
Yeah.
was that a retrospective? Was that all new
Nah.
works?
Most of that work was from the last 3 years. All but 12 pieces were from the last 3 years. I don't like the R word. My friend Ed Paschke had one when he was 53.
Oof.
And I walked up to him that night at the Art Institute and I said, "Hey, brother," I said, "it's good to be king." And he looked at me and he didn't look terribly happy. And he said, "Kid, you know what this is, right?" I said, "No." He said, "This is where they pull the shroud over your head and decide that you have nothing else to say."
Yeah.
And I went to school on that. I've had a few museums pitch me a retrospective. No, not going to have one. Nor do I think it's necessary. I still got a lot more to do. I still got a lot more growth to have. A lot more. There's always another peak. You know what I mean? There's always another hill to get up. So I think they're overrated. Retrospectives. I think it's something that more services the marketplace than it does the artist.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I walked away from the institutional art world individually at the perfect time. I'm happy to participate in a huge group show at the Met in 3 years with all the artists that I so admire.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of Helen Pashkin, who was this wonderful light artist who was really active in California. Yeah. She had a great show at Site Santa Fe, and she's in her 80s, and she called it her mid-career retrospective. That's the right attitude to have.
If you talk to her, you tell her that I'm a huge admirer.
I will. Yeah, absolutely. She does, really beautiful work.
The great Susan Rothenberg lived in Santa Fe. And I've so admired her paintings. I mean, plus you got the Black Rock guys out there, formerly Landfall Press. Steve Campbell, who taught me how to make etchings. I mean, that's another guy I owe a debt that I cannot repay.
Yeah. Well, you need to come visit us, and we'll get you and Steve on tape together.
Oh boy. Who knows where the bodies are buried?
Yeah.
You know what else nobody knows about him is he's a phenomenal collagist.
Yeah, I could have seen that from his prints.
Tell him that I'd like to put him in.
All right.
He made gorgeous collages. He made a show that was called Storming Heaven years ago, 2004, 2003 or 2004. And it was exquisite. It was just otherworldly great. He's also one of the best men I've ever known.
He's so good.
Yeah, just a kind man, and he changed my career for the better.
Was that where you were really first introduced to etching? Was in Landfall?
Yeah, I actually made 12 etchings with a girl I was engaged to in Scarsdale, New York, and we split up. But etching really got my attention because it rewarded the way that I drew.
Right.
I tend to draw slowly and deliberately, and it really shores up your draftsmanship because there's no room for mistakes. And if you make a mistake, you got to turn the lemon into lemonade. And Steve was the one who introduced it to me as a series of opportunities rather than a series of obstacles. He showed me spit biting. He showed me aquatints. He was endlessly patient with me. I'm not a patient man myself. I'm really not. And Steve was like endlessly. He was like, he's kind of like Yoda, but he's slightly better looking, you know? There's just this font of wisdom from, 45 years of printmaking,
Yeah.
And he's endlessly patient and endlessly kind. I can't say enough good things about him.
Yeah. It's been really, he and Chris have both been the most welcoming people to me and my husband. It's just, when you show up somewhere new and you don't know anyone, but you've got people who are always showing you kindness, looks like they're happy to see you. That means a lot.
There's always that dog whistle thing where we all recognize each other. It's like, okay, it was,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, Tony, it's been so nice to chat and to hear your stories. And I really, really appreciate you letting me borrow some of your time. I know you're a busy guy.
I'm happy to be here. I'm also happy that there's a podcast that's centered in printmaking. Good for you. I'm going to send you some names of people you should talk to.
I will definitely be glad to get those. So thanks so much, Tony. If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor Timothy Pauschak digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. Also, if monetary support isn't in the cards right now, you can leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts or your podcast listening app of choice, or get something from one of our great sponsors and tell them Hello Print Friend sent ya. But as always, the best thing you can do is listen and maybe tell a fellow print friend. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Miguel A. Aragon. We talk about his ambitious and process-driven practice, taking images straight from the headlines and deconstructing them with burnt embossment and power tools. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.